The day I received a $10,000 fine from the HOA for the height of my grass was the very same day I chose to transform my 20-acre estate into the most remarkable outdoor shooting range on the Texas border, a mere 800 feet from the residence of Karen, our HOA president. What they were unaware of was my background as a former Special Forces veteran with a law degree. They were also oblivious to the fact that this small ranch was the final legacy bequeathed to me by my grandfather, a man who had honorably served this nation. I had no intention of allowing a group of suit-clad, self-styled neighborhood authorities to seize this land from me. From where are you viewing this story? Feel free to share if you've ever faced difficulties with your own HOA. I can assure you, this account is bound to be astonishing. I can still recall gazing at the notice, printed on cream-colored paper bearing the Lakeside Estates HOA letterhead, and sensing my blood pressure escalate with every word. A penalty of $10,000 for grass that was, at most, 2 inches taller than their arbitrary standard. This wasn't the initial communication, but it was by far the most egregious. I had previously been sent notices regarding the supposedly improper display of my American flag. It wasn't. My truck being deemed an eyesore. It wasn't. And the small assembly of military memorabilia visible on my front porch, which was apparently disruptive to the neighborhood's aesthetic. Each alleged breach was accompanied by progressively larger fines, but this one was the final straw. I crushed the paper in my hand and threw it onto my kitchen counter, where it joined a stack of similar letters received over the preceding 3 months. The situation felt wrong. I had resided here for 5 years with only minimal contact with the HOA, and now, all of a sudden, I was being treated as the primary adversary. My grandfather had held this land since the 1960s, well before the Lakeside Estates community was developed around it. The builders had somehow persuaded him to integrate the front 5 acres into their esteemed HOA, but the rear 15 acres remained wonderfully free from their control, a circumstance for which I was becoming increasingly thankful. A knock on my door sounded at approximately 7 p.m. that evening. Michael Chin, my neighbor from 2 houses down, was standing on my porch with a nervous expression. "Mason, do you have a moment?" he inquired, looking over his shoulder as though concerned about being observed. Michael was a math instructor at the local high school. Though quiet and reserved, our interactions had always been amicable. I welcomed him inside, offered a beer that he politely refused, and waited for him to compose his thoughts. "I believe there's something you should be aware of," he began, his voice lowered. "During the last HOA meeting, after she presumed most attendees had departed, Victoria Harrington was discussing your property. She stated, and these were her exact words, 'We need to make living here so expensive for Caldwell that he has no choice but to sell.'" Michael looked at me, his face grim. "They are targeting you, Mason, and this isn't merely about upholding community standards." That evening, I searched through online county archives, seeking any details that could shed light on this sudden assault. It did not take much time to locate it. Harrington Estates, the construction firm owned by Victoria's spouse, Richard, had submitted initial documents for a new luxury resort project. The intended site was directly on the lake, covering several existing properties, mine included. My land, with its clear, unobstructed perspective of the lake and the mountains in the distance, was a piece of prime real estate, and they desired it so intensely that they were willing to resort to dishonest tactics. The monthly HOA meeting was set for the next evening. I had not been to one in several years, but I pressed my finest shirt, shined my combat boots to a high gloss, and entered the community center with the resolve of a man heading into a conflict. Victoria Harrington was seated at the head of the board table, her blonde hair styled in a tight bun, with designer glasses resting on her nose. She hesitated in the middle of a sentence upon seeing me claim a seat in the front row. "Mr. Caldwell," she remarked, her smile failing to warm her eyes. What a delightful surprise. We were in the process of discussing the landscaping challenges on Lakeview Drive. "I have no doubt you were," I retorted, mirroring her insincere smile with one of my own. "In fact, I would like to address the recent campaign of harassment, disguised as HOA violations, that has been aimed at my property." A ripple of conversation passed through the attendees. The majority of these individuals were my neighbors, some friends, others just known faces. They appeared taken aback by my claim, which indicated to me that Victoria had managed to keep her vendetta fairly private. I presented this sequence of violations, displaying photographs of my land that clearly disproved many of the alleged infractions. I was systematically constructing my argument, just as Elena, my old college associate who was now a property lawyer, had instructed. Victoria's composure began to fray when I brought up the resort project. That development is still in the early planning stages, she retorted sharply. It is entirely unrelated to HOA matters. But the revelation had been made. I could observe the dawning of understanding on the faces of several people in the room. This was not about maintaining community standards. It was about dispossessing people for financial gain. Furthermore, Victoria went on, her tone becoming patronizing. Your property has become a blight. That military paraphernalia and the enormous flag, it does not align with the aesthetic our community aims for. And honestly, considering your history, certain residents have voiced worries about stability. There it was, the poorly concealed allusion to my military career, the insinuation that I was somehow defective or a threat because I had served my nation. A cold sense of calm washed over me, the kind I used to feel just before a mission. Mrs. Harrington, I stated calmly, if you are questioning my stability due to my service to this country, I recommend you select your following words with extreme caution. A profound silence fell over the room. Victoria must have grasped that she had overstepped, as she quickly tried to retract her statement, reassuring everyone that she had intended no disrespect toward veterans. However, the mask had been removed, and everyone present had glimpsed what lay beneath. As the meeting concluded, she came over to me, her smile restored but her eyes as cold as ice. If you are unable to settle the fines and adhere to our rules, we will have no choice but to put a lien on your property, Mr. Caldwell. No one desires to live next to, well, an individual who cannot uphold community standards. I moved closer, my voice low but resolute. You have fundamentally miscalculated who I am, Mrs. Harrington. I may lack your financial resources, but I possess something far more precious. I am familiar with the law. The brief flash of doubt in her eyes brought me a somber sense of satisfaction. As I walked back to my house that night, my thoughts were already churning with options. They aimed to engage in financial warfare, which was fine by me. But they had overlooked one crucial detail. I was trained for combat on all fronts. The following morning, I contacted Elena Rodriguez. We had been good friends in college before our lives diverged, taking me into the military and her into law school. She now focused on property law and was known for her vigorous defense against corporate land acquisitions. Mason Caldwell, she greeted, her voice filled with pleasant surprise. It must have been, 3 years? We had a brief catch-up before I laid out my predicament. A lengthy silence followed my explanation. Those monsters, she finally uttered, her voice sharp with indignation. You know, Harrington Estates attempted the same maneuver with my parents' farm while I was in law school. Different methods, same objective. I've been anticipating an opportunity to challenge them. When are you available to come to my office? Elena's downtown office was compact yet effective, its walls adorned with legal texts and framed diplomas. She listened with focused attention as I presented all the paperwork I had compiled, making occasional notes and asking for clarification. All right, she said at last, laying a survey map out on her desk. Here is the positive news. You are correct regarding the HOA's jurisdiction. According to these initial property documents, only your front 5 acres are under their control. The remainder is entirely beyond their authority. She pointed to the map, her expression pensive. And this is where it gets interesting. They actually altered the HOA boundaries 3 years ago, in a manner that included more of your property than was stipulated in the original contract your grandfather agreed to. That change may not be legally valid, as it seems they failed to obtain the required consent from all the landowners involved. In the following week, Elena and I investigated further. We found that the HOA had discreetly modified several bylaws throughout the years, with each alteration simplifying the process of ousting residents who did not comply. We located past instances where Harrington Estates had employed comparable strategies to obtain desirable properties. Most compellingly, we brought to light a financial impropriety involving Victoria Harrington from 10 years prior, embezzlement allegations that had curiously vanished after crucial evidence went missing. This is invaluable, Elena remarked, displaying the court records. While not directly pertinent to your situation, it reveals her character. And if we require some leverage, well, she grinned, and I recalled why we had been such good friends. Elena not only understood the law, she knew how to achieve victory. My next visit was to Sheriff Jake Thompson. He had been a friend of my grandfather's, and though he upheld professional impartiality in local disagreements, he was an honest man who respected the truth. I met him at the town diner, where he was enjoying a cup of coffee after his shift. "I hear you're causing some friction with the Harringtons," he commented as I settled into the booth opposite him. His voice was impassive, but a glimmer of amusement was in his eyes. "Your grandfather would be pleased. He never approved of how they came in and began altering everything." We conversed for almost an hour. Jake could not formally pick a side, but he provided some valuable information about other homeowners who had been pressured into selling, about noise complaints that were applied selectively, and about Richard Harrington's relationships with specific county officials. "Just be cautious," he recommended as we said our goodbyes. "Victoria is the clear danger, but Richard is the one to be wary of. He strategizes for the long term." Back at my house, I laid all the materials out on my dining room table: maps, legal papers, and notes from my discussions with Elena and Jake. The strategy was evident. The Harringtons coveted my land for their resort project and were using the HOA as their tool. However, they had made a grave error in thinking I would yield to their pressure. I had endured far worse than an arrogant HOA president with grandiose ambitions. As I examined the property maps once more, a concept started to crystallize. The rear 15 acres of my land, the section not governed by the HOA, directly abutted Victoria and Richard's expansive lakeside home. Their immaculate backyard, complete with an infinity pool and professionally landscaped gardens, was situated less than a quarter of a mile from my property's edge. And Texas state law was exceptionally unambiguous about the kinds of activities allowed on private property in unincorporated zones. That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Elena to verify the legality of my plan. The second went to my old military friend Ryan, who now managed a shooting range in Austin. The third was a message left for the county clerk's office, informing them of my intent to apply for a business license first thing in the morning. Victoria believed she could force me out with penalties for overgrown grass. Let's see how she would react to the report of gunfire at 8 a.m. every Sunday, just as she was hosting her renowned champagne brunches by the pool. The application for the business license was remarkably simple. Caldwell Tactical Range, I inscribed on the document, outlining my intentions for a medium-sized outdoor shooting establishment dedicated to responsible firearm use, veteran assistance, and public education. Since the property was located outside the city's jurisdiction and designated for agricultural use, the regulations were few. I incorporated thorough safety measures, plans to lessen noise, though intentionally not enough to silence it completely, and protocols for environmental safeguarding. When the clerk looked up with a questioning glance at the location, I simply grinned and stated, "It's family property, held in our name for many years." While awaiting the license approval, I remained active. I got in touch with area veterans organizations, proposing complimentary memberships and tailored programs. I made contact with clubs of responsible gun owners, presenting my range as a secure, well-run option compared to the informal shooting areas in the desert. Additionally, I began to prepare the property, designating firing lanes and designing the necessary infrastructure. These were all completely lawful actions that, by chance, generated a significant amount of noise during the day, particularly when Ryan brought over some large machinery to assist with the earthworks. It took precisely 3 days for Victoria to become aware. I was in the process of marking the primary firing line when her Mercedes screeched to a stop at my property's boundary. She stepped out like a tempest in high-end attire, her face red with rage. "What do you imagine you are doing?" she exclaimed, stumbling over the rough terrain in her unsuitable footwear. I stood up straight, cleaned my hands on my pants, and then responded, "I'm improving my property, Mrs. Harrington." Well beyond the reach of the HOA, I should mention. Her gaze sharpened as she observed the partially cleared area and the markers indicating what would undoubtedly become shooting lanes. "You are not permitted to establish a shooting range here," she stammered. It's entirely within my legal rights," I concluded for her. "I have already submitted all the required documents. Would you care to review the copies? My attorney has ensured that everything is compliant." The emergency HOA meeting convened the next evening was at full capacity. News had circulated rapidly, and homeowners were intrigued, some anxious, others privately entertained by Victoria's apparent agitation. This proposed establishment, she was declaring as I entered, would generate intolerable noise and create potentially hazardous situations near our family residences. I held back until she had completed her introductory statements before I lifted my hand. "If I might," I began, rising to speak to the assembly. "First, the range will be constructed to surpass all safety standards. Second, it will be open only during conventional hours. And third, it is important to recognize that the land in question does not fall under the HOA's authority. My presence at this meeting is a gesture of goodwill to my neighbors. A fervent debate ensued. A number of residents echoed Victoria's anxieties, whereas others, especially those who had also been subjected to HOA coercion, were more inclined to be supportive. Michael Chin unexpectedly spoke up, noting that the HOA had never raised objections to the Harringtons' late-night pool parties, which frequently breached noise regulations. Another neighbor, Sarah Williams, raised the question of why there was so much resistance to a facility that could offer safety instruction to the local community. Through all of this, Victoria grew increasingly agitated, particularly when I calmly refuted each of her points with thoroughly researched arguments. By the time the meeting concluded, the attendees were split, but Victoria's unquestioned power had been noticeably diminished. The following day, Richard Harrington came to my door. In contrast to his wife, he was composed, collected, and direct. "Let's approach this as businessmen," he proposed, making himself at home in my living room with the confidence of someone who is used to having his way. "I realize you are displeased with the HOA notices. It's possible we have been overly aggressive. I am willing to have those fines nullified." He paused, observing me intently, "and to present you with an offer of double the market price for your property. A cash transaction, swift closure, no hitches." His smile was purely superficial. "You could acquire a far superior property without all this," he indicated vaguely. Turmoil. I allowed the quiet to linger between us, observing his struggle to conceal his impatience. At last, I leaned in. "Mr. Harrington, this land is more than just real estate to me. It's the legacy of my grandfather. He instilled in me the importance of defending what is mine, and that is precisely what I am doing." Richard's smile became rigid. "Be practical, Caldwell. You cannot prevail against us. I have connections all over the county." The intimidation was barely concealed, but I had contended with far worse than an affluent man accustomed to always winning. "And I am supported by the law," I responded calmly, "along with a growing number of your neighbors who are weary of being intimidated by your wife and her regulations." His face grew stern. "You will come to regret this choice." As I escorted him to the door, I couldn't resist adding, "Incidentally, you are all welcome at our official opening. I will make sure to extend a personal invitation to Victoria." As Richard's vehicle vanished down the road, I was filled with a blend of contentment and apprehension. I had effectively declared war on two of the most influential individuals in the county. However, as my grandfather often said, there are times when you must make your stand, even when, especially when, the circumstances seem to be against you. The permit was granted the next week, and the construction work started with vigor. News traveled quickly through the area, and to my surprise, offers of assistance began to arrive. Veterans volunteered their knowledge, and neighbors with building experience offered their help. What had begun as a personal conflict was transforming into something more significant, a challenge to the unbridled authority the Harringtons had wielded for an excessive amount of time. 3 weeks later, I sent out the invitations on pale pink cardstock with ornate cursive script, the very style Victoria would choose for her social functions. The invitation provided details for the grand opening of the Caldwell Tactical Range, featuring complimentary demonstrations, safety workshops, and a neighborhood barbecue. Each envelope also held a small pamphlet outlining the sound characteristics of different firearms, with a special focus on the distance certain sounds could travel over open water. For instance, a lake that lay between a shooting range and a mansion with an infinity pool. The event was planned for the first Sunday of the upcoming month, coinciding perfectly with the time of Victoria's celebrated champagne brunch. I should have anticipated that the Harringtons would retaliate. 3 days following the distribution of the invitations, a makeshift blockade materialized at the driveway to my property. Construction barricades adorned with official-looking "road" closed for maintenance signs. The county maintenance office was perplexed when I contacted them. They had no planned projects in that vicinity. By that afternoon, Sheriff Thompson had the barricades taken down, citing the absence of required permits, but the intent was unmistakable. The Harringtons were deploying their influence. Following that was the unexpected reassessment of my business license. A county representative called, stating that due to community concerns, they needed to carry out further safety checks before my scheduled opening. When I asked for clarification on these concerns, he grew evasive and uneasy. Elena made a few inquiries and found out that Richard had golfing companions within the permit department. A standard delaying tactic, she clarified over coffee at her office. They cannot legally refuse your permit without a valid reason, but they can draw out the procedure, hoping to disrupt your plans. She tapped her pen on her legal pad. Deep in thought. We must anticipate their subsequent action. Do you have any idea what it might be? I did not have to wait long for an answer. The local paper published a front-page article about community concerns over proposed gun range, complete with statements from anxious residents worried about noise, safety, and declining property values. Victoria was quoted at length, conveying her profound concern for the children of our community. The story neglected to report that the majority of these worried residents were part of committees led by Victoria, or that the journalist's spouse was employed by Harrington Estates. Michael sent me a text as soon as the newspapers were delivered. Saw the smear piece. Don't sweat it. Everyone knows it's garbage. But later in the day, he called with more disturbing information. Victoria confronted me in the school's parking lot, he reported, his voice strained with anger. She said if I continued to back your dangerous project, the school board might review my employment. She's on the Education Foundation Board, Mason. She could create problems for me. This pattern of intimidation was not confined to Michael. Other allies shared similar stories of veiled threats concerning business licenses, zoning conflicts, and even tax reviews. Victoria was using every bit of influence she possessed, and in a small county, that influence was extensive. It was time for a new approach. If the Harringtons wished to engage in a public relations battle, I was prepared to play that game as well. With Elena's assistance, I launched a straightforward website, HOA Nightmare Stories, where residents could anonymously recount their dealings with the Lakeside Estates HOA. In a matter of days, we received numerous entries detailing instances of biased enforcement, baseless fines, and coercive conduct. We refrained from using Victoria's name, but the recurring themes were obvious to anyone reading the submissions. In the meantime, I proceeded with the preparations for the range's opening, now incorporating extra safety features that even the most meticulous inspector would find faultless. Ryan enlisted his top instructors, all of whom were veterans with outstanding qualifications, to assist with the setup. We navigated the inspection delays, keeping detailed records of every step to thwart any additional meddling. The community's reaction was positive, despite the article in the newspaper. Enthusiasm for the range was on the rise, particularly from local law enforcement officers who had been commuting more than an hour to the closest adequate facility. Victoria's subsequent move was audacious, even by her standards. During a specially convened HOA meeting, she put forward a 300% surge in association dues for properties involved in activities detrimental to community values. The meaning of detrimental activities was conveniently ambiguous and left to the discretion of the board. It was a direct assault intended to cripple me financially while sidestepping the legal complications of directly targeting my enterprise. She clearly had not anticipated my attendance at the meeting, let alone that I would arrive prepared. As she concluded her proposal, wearing a look of smug self-assurance, I lifted my hand. Before we proceed to a vote, I believe there is something everyone should listen to, I stated, retrieving my phone. I had anticipated that Victoria might attempt a maneuver like this and had brought a small audio recorder to the previous regular meeting. I then played back her unguarded remarks to Richard after most of the attendees had departed. These middle-class nobodies don't understand quality. We need to push out the undesirables before they drag down property values. The room was thrown into turmoil. Victoria's expression shifted from stunned to enraged as her own voice resounded through the community center. Several board members appeared extremely uncomfortable, while residents were shouting inquiries and protests. Amid the turmoil, I met Michael's gaze from across the room. He gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The meeting broke up without a decision on the fee hike, with Victoria exiting angrily amid demands for her to step down. It was a notable win, yet I understood that the conflict was far from finished. The Harringtons had too much on the line to concede after one mortifying disclosure. That evening, as I was going over the safety measures for the range, Elena contacted me with fresh intelligence. "You have to see this," she said urgently. "I've been examining the Harrington Estates official documents, and something is amiss. The environmental impact assessments for their resort proposal, they are nearly word for word the same as reports submitted for 3 other projects, with only the names altered. I suspect they are manipulating data to expedite the approval process." This was more significant than our HOA conflict. It suggested widespread corruption. Continue your investigation, I advised her, and be cautious. Victoria is now desperate, and desperate individuals can become dangerous adversaries. As Victoria's influence within the HOA disintegrated, I found myself pondering the irony of the situation. She had overlooked a fundamental principle of conflict. Never misjudge your opponent when you have them cornered, particularly when that opponent is skilled in using both the law and firearms. Elena's find regarding the manipulated environmental documents was merely the start. In the 2 weeks that followed, we brought to light a sequence of disturbing actions by Harrington Estates. There were dubious land transactions, potential bribery of county officials, and environmental breaches that had been methodically concealed. The most alarming discovery was proof that Victoria had knowingly altered HOA boundaries and regulations without the necessary consent from members, which could render years of HOA decisions invalid. This is not just a matter of poor ethics, Elena stated as we examined the papers laid out on my dining room table. Some of these actions are patently illegal. The real issue is how we should proceed with this information. I was considering our choices when Sheriff Thompson got in touch. Mason, I thought you should be aware. There's discussion about your permit being rejected due to a minor detail. I can't disclose my source, but you might want to act on this quickly. After expressing my gratitude, I promptly called Elena, who recommended we be present at the upcoming County Planning Commission meeting. They cannot refuse a permit that fulfills all legal criteria without exposing themselves to risk, she clarified. However, they will attempt to find a loophole if possible. We must be there to refute whatever they present. The Planning Commission meeting took place in the county courthouse, an impressive structure that had witnessed numerous local conflicts over the years. Richard Harrington was present, appearing unusually strained as he conversed quietly with a couple of commission members before the session started. When he noticed Elena and me, his face briefly hardened before he regained his composure and gave a rigid nod in our direction. The meeting moved through standard items before arriving at the topic of my permit. The commission's head, a slender man named Dawson who had obviously been briefed, brought up newly identified concerns about the impact on the watershed as a reason for potentially rejecting the application. Elena was immediately on her feet, showing documents that proved we had already taken care of all environmental issues, had put in extra safeguards beyond what was required, and were in full compliance with all applicable laws. Moreover, she stated calmly, I find it noteworthy that these issues are being raised solely in connection with Mr. Caldwell's small-scale range, and not for the extensive resort project being proposed by Harrington Estates, a project that, incidentally, would have a significantly larger effect on the very same watershed. She then passed out copies of the strikingly similar environmental studies we had found, along with a legal summary detailing the possible offenses they represented. My client is ready to take all necessary legal action if his permit is denied without proper justification, which includes lodging complaints with state regulatory bodies about these discrepancies. The commission members appeared visibly uneasy as they looked over the papers. Richard's expression had changed from strained to furious, but he just managed to keep his composure. Following a short, hushed discussion, Chairman Dawson cleared his throat. Given the thorough documentation that has been submitted, I find no basis to further postpone Mr. Caldwell's permit. The application is approved, subject to the usual final inspection. As we exited the courthouse, Richard approached us in the parking area. You are making a grave error, he stated, his voice quiet and restrained, though his eyes betrayed his anger. This is no longer simply about a plot of land. Elena positioned herself between us, her demeanor professional yet firm. Mr. Harrington, I recommend that you channel all subsequent communications through our legal representatives. Any effort to obstruct my client's legitimate enterprise will be addressed with a suitable legal action. Back at my house, I was surprised and concerned to see Victoria waiting on my porch. She had never visited alone before. Her typically immaculate appearance was gone. Her hair was somewhat messy, and her eyes held the fierce look of someone at their breaking point. This has gone on long enough, she declared as I came closer. You are ruining everything we have established in this community. I asked her to come inside, mainly to prevent a public spectacle for the neighbors, but she declined to enter my home. You believe you're so smart with your legal tricks and your sad little website, she went on, her voice getting louder. But you don't know who you're up against. My husband's family has been influential in this county for a long time. You are insignificant. A has-been soldier messing with guns on a worthless plot of land. I let her continue her tirade, observing as the carefully built image of a community leader disintegrated to show the privileged, frantic individual underneath. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I replied softly, "Victoria, this ceased to be about the HOA the moment you attempted to drive me from my own home. It is now about being held responsible. You have managed this community as if it were your private domain, disregarding rules and intimidating anyone who stood in your way. That is over now." Her face twisted in fury. "I will ruin you," she hissed. "When I am finished, you will regret not accepting Richard's offer." As she hastily returned to her vehicle, I observed a small, blinking red light on my porch eaves, my security camera, documenting every word and motion of her unhinged threat. That evening, while I was watching the recording of Victoria's outburst, my phone rang. It was Richard Harrington, his voice low and professional. "We need to have a private conversation. Not at your residence, not at mine. The diner on Highway 16 tomorrow at 7 a.m. He ended the call before I could answer. I immediately contacted both Elena and Sheriff Thompson to inform them of the meeting. It could be a setup, or it could be a sincere proposal, Elena considered. In any case, you should not go by yourself. Thompson arranged for a deputy to, by chance, be having breakfast at the diner, while Elena would be seated in a nearby booth. Whatever Richard's intentions were, I would be ready. The diner was almost deserted when I got there the next morning. Richard was in a rear booth, holding a cup of coffee and appearing as though he hadn't slept. As I sat down opposite him, he scanned the area to confirm our privacy. "Victoria is unaware that I am here," he started directly, "and she must not learn of it." He seemed older than his 56 years under the stark fluorescent lights, the stress of the recent turmoil apparent in the creases on his face. "I wish to propose a deal, not on behalf of the company, but for myself." He slid a file across the table. It contained proof that Victoria had been forging signatures on HO's papers for years, including Richard's own. "She has lost all control," he stated softly. "This resort development has turned into an obsession for her. But there is something you need to be aware of. The actual motive for her specific desire for your property." He leaned in, speaking even more quietly. "There is an untouched aquifer located beneath your land. Water rights are extremely valuable in this county, Mason. The resort is merely the public justification. The true asset is gaining control over that water supply for future projects." Suddenly, everything fell into place. The forceful methods, the manipulated environmental studies, Victoria's escalating franticness. This wasn't merely about a high-end resort. It was about seizing a vital resource in an area where water was scarce. "Why are you revealing this to me?" I inquired, scrutinizing Richard's expression for any sign of falsehood. He let out a deep sigh. "Mainly for my own protection. I have dedicated 30 years to building my company. Victoria's impulsive actions are on the verge of destroying it all. I prefer to make an arrangement now rather than confront the inevitable consequences." He detailed his offer. He would supply proof of Victoria's unlawful actions and provide testimony if required, in return for immunity from legal action and a negotiated agreement that would let him save a portion of his company. "Victoria has been transferring funds into her private accounts for several months," he mentioned. "I need to safeguard what I am able to." As I departed from the diner, Elena joined me in the parking lot. "So," she questioned, her face showing worry. I gave her the file Richard had passed to me. "We have them," I said plainly. "But this situation has now expanded far beyond an HOA conflict." With Richard's proof at our disposal, Elena recommended we move forward with a clear plan. "This is no longer just about securing your victory," she clarified as we sorted through the papers in her office. "We are dealing with systemic corruption that impacts the whole community. We must construct an infallible case." Over the subsequent days, we worked on verifying Richard's statements with our own investigation and information from other residents who had been affected. The picture that took shape was damning. Victoria had utilized the HOA as her private enforcement squad, zeroing in on properties she coveted for her own projects while turning a blind eye to the infractions of her supporters. She had altered bylaws, forged signatures, and employed threats to quell any resistance. And at the heart of it all was the aquifer, a water supply so precious that it warranted almost any method to obtain it. While Elena was constructing the legal argument, I turned my attention to the community side of things. The HOA Nightmare Stories website had transformed into a central point for residents to voice their anxieties, which now extended beyond just HOA issues. People were beginning to talk about water rights, the effects of development, and the kind of community they envisioned for the future. Michael Chun had unexpectedly become a leading voice, setting up casual gatherings where homeowners could express themselves openly, free from the fear of Victoria's retaliation. What had begun as my own fight against persecution was growing into a grassroots movement for accountability and openness. Victoria, in the meantime, was intensifying her retaliatory measures. The local newspaper now consistently ran letters decrying the dangerous gun range that posed a threat to the community. Signs protesting the facility began to appear in yards. Most alarmingly, my supporters started reporting more frequent acts of intimidation, ranging from unexplained parking citations to abrupt tax reevaluations. When Michael's tires were punctured in the school parking lot and no security cameras captured the event, the intent was clear. Victoria was becoming desperate. Sheriff Thompson boosted patrols around my property and the residences of my main supporters, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. Be cautious, he advised me. When individuals like Victoria begin to lose their grip on power, they can become erratic. Elena proposed that we organize a special community assembly to share our discoveries. Not an official HOA meeting, she specified, but a town hall accessible to all, including media from adjacent counties. We need to make it so public that they cannot disrupt it. We reserved the high school auditorium, circulated flyers throughout the area, and sent formal invitations to county officials, making it understood that their presence, or noticeable non-attendance, would be recorded. The evening prior to the assembly, I got a text from Richard. Victoria is aware of what's happening. She has been destroying paperwork. Be ready for anything. The auditorium was filled beyond its limits, with attendees lining the walls and overflowing into the corridor. Victoria and Richard were seated in the front row, she with a defiant look, he appearing uneasy yet accepting. Elena had recommended that I let her manage the legal aspects of the presentation while I concentrated on the community repercussions, leveraging our individual talents. As the assembly commenced, I briefly discussed how my own conflict had brought to light larger problems that concerned everyone in Lakeside Estates. This is no longer about me, I addressed the audience. It is about determining who shapes the destiny of our community, a select group operating in the shadows, or all of us collaborating with transparency. Elena then systematically laid out the evidence, using visuals and documents to detail the ongoing manipulation and corruption. She clarified the importance of the aquifer, the falsified environmental studies, and the unlawful HOA activities. Every homeowner in Lakeside Estates has been impacted by these actions, she stated in conclusion. The regulations you believed were safeguarding your community have been used as a weapon against you, frequently in an illegal manner. Throughout the presentation, Victoria's expression changed from scornful to alarmed as she grasped the extent of what we had brought to light. Richard remained impassive, looking directly forward. When Elena invited questions from the audience, the floodgates opened. Residents who had been coerced into staying quiet for years at last found their voices, recounting their own encounters with HOA intimidation. Several county officials appeared increasingly troubled as their connections to Harrington Estates were brought up. Victoria tried to write off the claims as the exaggerations of unhappy homeowners over trivial matters, but her trustworthiness was destroyed when Elena showed the security camera footage of her threatening me on my own porch. Witnessing Victoria's frantic actions displayed on the large screen, her meticulously crafted persona of a community advocate replaced by a furious aggressor, marked a decisive moment. Even her own allies seemed stunned. Victoria finally lost her composure when Michael Chun described how she had threatened his career for backing me. Of course I did, she yelled, jumping up from her chair. Individuals like you and Caldwell are ruining everything we have established. Do you believe that high-quality communities just happen? Someone must uphold the standards. Someone must shield property values from those who do not fit in. The auditorium fell completely silent as her words lingered in the space. And who exactly would those people be? I inquired softly into the microphone. Victoria's eyes met mine, her face a mix of animosity and dread as she understood her mistake. Veterans, I went on. Teachers, the very people who built this community before you determined it wasn't exclusive enough. A low sound spread through the audience, growing into a loud expression of disapproval aimed at Victoria. She looked about the room, seemingly taken aback to find herself unexpectedly portrayed as the antagonist. "You fail to grasp the situation," she argued, her voice becoming higher. All of this was for the good of the community. Property values, appearances. Richard put a calming hand on her arm, which she aggressively pushed away. "Do not touch me. You have already betrayed me." The accusation remained in the air as Richard's expression validated her belief. Victoria redirected her attention to the audience, her self-control completely gone. "Fine. You want the real story? That property has water. Water that we require for our development. Water that will ensure this community prospers. And I was not going to allow some obstinate former soldier with his firearms and flags to obstruct progress." Her confession brought the room to a standstill. Elena moved forward. "Mrs. Harrington, are you acknowledging that you intentionally altered HOA rules to unlawfully dispossess Mr. Caldwell of his property in order to secure the aquifer beneath it?" Victoria grasped the legal weight of her public admission too late. She glanced around frantically, as if searching for an escape, before heading for the exit. "This assembly is a sham. You will be hearing from my legal counsel." The door shut loudly behind her, the sound echoing as if to signal the conclusion of her control over Lakeside Estates. That evening, the community decided to oust Victoria from the HOA board and form a new committee to thoroughly reevaluate and amend all HOA rules with proper community involvement. Michael Chun was put forward to spearhead this reform committee, his unassuming honesty being precisely what was required to restore confidence. As attendees left the auditorium, many paused to express their gratitude or to recount their own feelings of relief. Sheriff Thompson came over, his face serious. "That was truly remarkable," he commented. "But this isn't finished. Victoria Harrington is not someone who takes defeat well. Be vigilant." His caution turned out to be accurate. As I headed home that night, I couldn't dismiss the thought that this triumph, though substantial, was merely one engagement in a continuing conflict. Victoria's final words were not just the outburst of a vanquished adversary. They were a vow of vengeance, and individuals with influence and means can be formidable foes, particularly when they feel they have nothing more to lose. The shooting range was almost finished. In spite of the setbacks and disruptions, we had succeeded in building something I was truly proud of, a cutting-edge establishment with top-notch safety measures, designated zones for various proficiency levels, and tailored programs for veterans and emergency personnel. The official opening was set for that Sunday, and the public's reaction had been extraordinary, with individuals traveling from adjacent counties to lend their support. Even some who had previously been critical had changed their minds after witnessing the professionalism and community-oriented nature of the project. I should have been entirely concentrated on the last-minute details, but Sheriff Thompson's caution lingered in my mind. Victoria had been unusually silent since the public meeting 2 weeks ago, and her silence was more unsettling than her earlier aggressions. My apprehension was confirmed when Ryan contacted me late on Thursday evening. "Mason, an attempt was made to get into the range area. The motion detectors registered them close to the equipment building." I was in my vehicle before he had finished his sentence, calling Sheriff Thompson as I drove. Upon my arrival, Thompson was already present with 2 of his deputies, inspecting new tire marks and footprints near the property's edge. "At least 3 individuals," he stated soberly. "The security system scared them off before they could cause any significant harm, but they left this." He gave me a crumpled piece of paper that had been held down by a stone near the main structure. The note was brief but menacing. "Sunday is canceled. I'm staying here for the night," I informed Thompson. "And tomorrow, we will install cameras at every entry point." He concurred with a nod. "I'll have my officers drive by frequently, but I cannot station anyone here full-time. Not without stronger proof." After he departed, I called Elena to bring her up to speed and then prepared for a long watch. My past military experience resurfaced as I chose a vantage point that offered a clear view. At about 2 a.m., I spotted headlights on the access road, approaching without their main beams on. I remained concealed, filming with my phone as 3 individuals got out of a black SUV that had no license plates. Even in the dim light, I could make out Victoria's recognizable form as she guided the other 2 men, who were holding what appeared to be gasoline containers. I was faced with a decision: confront them on the spot, or collect proof and allow the authorities to take over. The soldier in me urged for swift action. But the planner in me understood that catching them in the act with reliable witnesses would resolve this for good. I sent a text to Thompson with my position and a short summary, then kept filming. As the three neared the main structure, they were systematic, splashing liquid around the base and talking about where to put what they referred to as the package. I distinctly heard Victoria say, "Ensure it appears to be an accident, a wiring malfunction or something similar. The insurance will not cover it if the cause is obvious." Sheriff Thompson's arrival was executed flawlessly. No lights or sirens, but several cars encircled the area before Victoria and her team realized what was unfolding. "Police, don't move." The two men instantly let go of the gas cans and put their hands up. Victoria, however, tried to run for the SUV. She didn't make it far before a deputy caught her. As Thompson informed them of their rights, Victoria's gaze met mine as I stepped out from my cover, my phone still capturing the scene. The animosity in her look was intense, but there was something else beneath it, a sense of shock that she was at last being held accountable for her deeds. The consequences came swiftly. Victoria and the men she hired faced charges of attempted arson, criminal trespass, and conspiracy. The inquiry revealed that one of the men was a past employee of Harrington Estates who had a history of carrying out Victoria's illicit tasks. Richard initiated divorce proceedings the next day, making a public show of separating himself from his wife's criminal behavior while fully cooperating with the law to mitigate his own legal troubles. Financial investigations showed that Victoria had, in fact, been redirecting company funds to her private accounts, readying herself for a dire outcome that had now come to pass. In spite of the turmoil, or maybe due to it, the grand opening of the Caldwell Tactical Range took place as scheduled that Sunday. The attendance surpassed all my expectations. Veterans, members of law enforcement, families, and local residents all gathered to express their solidarity. Michael Chin delivered a brief address on the resilience of the community and the significance of confronting intimidation and corruption. Elena was also present, appearing pleased but advising that the legal battle against Victoria would probably be drawn out and intricate. "She possesses wealth and influence," she cautioned me. "This will require patience." In the weeks that followed, the community started to recover from Victoria's harmful influence. The newly organized HOA, under Michael's leadership, began amending bylaws to stop such abuses in the future. The county started inquiries into other Harrington Estates ventures, finding numerous cases of environmental infractions and licensing problems. Richard, in an effort to rescue what remained of his public image and company, proposed creating a community trust to safeguard the aquifer, guaranteeing it would serve everyone, not just corporate interests. It was not a selfless act but a strategic move for damage control, yet the outcome was still a victory for the community. As for myself, I discovered an unforeseen tranquility in the outcome. The range evolved into more than just a commercial venture. It became a hub for social connection, particularly for veterans who discovered a sense of brotherhood and mission there. The HOA notices ceased, and the fines were nullified once it was established they stemmed from Victoria's manipulated regulations. My grandfather's property was preserved, his legacy respected in a manner that I believe would have filled him with pride. There was a certain justice in it all. Victoria had attempted to oust me because of my identity and principles, yet it was those very characteristics that led to her downfall. The concluding event occurred 6 months later when Victoria's trial began. I gave my testimony about the persistent harassment, the intimidation, and ultimately, the attempted arson. Elena laid out our carefully compiled evidence, which was now bolstered by official findings. Richard testified against his soon-to-be former wife, corroborating her fixation on obtaining my property and gaining control of the aquifer. Throughout the proceedings, Victoria remained expressionless, her high-end fashion replaced with simple business wear. Her commanding presence lessened but not completely erased. The outcome was as expected, guilty on all charges. The judge, evidently not swayed by Victoria's efforts to paint herself as a community-focused leader who had simply been overzealous, gave her a suspended sentence, which was dependent on her completing significant community service and paying financial damages. "Mrs. Harrington," he declared during the sentencing, "your conduct demonstrated a deep-seated contempt for the law, for your neighbors, and for the rights of individuals. You turned an association designed to unite people into a tool for bullying and intimidating those who opposed you. This court will not ignore such flagrant misuse of authority." I chose not to seek further civil penalties, but with one stipulation: Victoria had to make a substantial donation to a fund that aids local veterans' housing projects. It felt appropriate that her efforts to evict me from my residence would ultimately contribute to helping others find homes of their own. She consented through clenched teeth, likely reasoning that any other option would be more severe. As she departed the courthouse that day, swarmed by journalists but deserted by her one-time supporters, I felt no sense of victory, only a profound relief that justice had been served and a community had found its voice again. Today, Lakeside Estates has been transformed. The reorganized HOA is dedicated to addressing real community issues instead of obsessing over minor aesthetic details. The Caldwell Tactical Range is a success, providing safety instruction, veteran outreach, and public events. The planned resort was scaled back into a more modest venture that now takes into account environmental preservation and water rights. And on Sunday mornings, if you listen closely, you can still catch the sound of Liberty carrying over the lake, not as a provocation, but as a testament to the importance of holding one's ground. Victoria despised the sound of freedom from my range. Now, she experiences the sound of her own defeat in the courtroom's clamor. In a twist of fate, her estate was sold at auction for a mere tenth of its value to cover her restitution. The purchaser was a nonprofit organization for veteran aid that I established. It seems that karma is not merely a philosophical idea, but a tangible and resounding force. If there is a single takeaway from this experience, it is that aggressors rely on your passivity. They bank on you weighing the cost of resistance and concluding it is too great. At times, the only way to handle someone who aims to wear you down is to stand resolute and demonstrate that you are prepared to fight back, whether with legal arguments or the sound of rifle fire across the Texas border. Where are you tuning in from? Has an HOA ever attempted to exert undue pressure on you? Always remember, your home is a possession worth defending. And occasionally, the most effective defense is a well-considered offense.